Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's get started. Um, Recording started. So for today's presentation, we're going to have a few things on the docket to touch on. We're going to go over first, actually, risks for women, hormones, hormone cycle, menopause, of course. And then we're going to flow more into healthy weight management, important nutrients to highlight for this phase of our life cycle. And of course, stress management, sleep interventional tips, ways to maintain or build muscle, as that plays a key pivotal role in our hormones. And we will end with supplementation. So, of course, with this presentation, it is not meant for specific, personalized medicine, but I think this is a really great tool to get some ideas to start incorporating into the lifestyle and to bring to your dietitian or your provider as to how this applies personally to you. So part of why we wanted to have this presentation is, we're all women, we love people. And one of the biggest threats to women's health is, of course, heart disease, right? The second is cancer, lower respiratory diseases, especially like COPD, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, etc. as we go on. Especially heart disease, I want to highlight, is one of those conditions that is the largest killer of individuals in our country. And if we can start to change our approach to menopause and hormone changes, we can potentially help to impact our heart health. So these are all chronic inflammatory conditions that we can start to target with diet and lifestyle as well to focus on prevention. So I'm going to get a little sciencey at first, but I pinky promise everybody, it's not going to be like this the entire presentation. So we're going to go through the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle is typically going to last about 28 days. And let's go first into the basics of it. So day one of the menstrual cycle is the start of menses, or one's period, right? So onset of bleeding. And that's typically going to be days 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 days of a regular cycle. And that's where the lining sheds and we enter what's called the follicular phase, which you'll see right here depicted up top. So, which the follicular phase is about days 6 through 14 until ovulation, where estrogen is steadily rising, steadily rising. As you can see right here, this green line, right? Estrogen steadily rising throughout the follicular phase of our cycle until about ovulation, right? So until ovulation is where estrogen is steadily rising and we're feeling really good. Estrogen, makes our skin feel really nice. It helps our digestion and we have lots of energy, right? So intermittent fasting is not something we typically like to recommend, but we get a lot of questions about it. Intermittent fasting is more possible towards like the first 2 weeks of our cycle, but once ovulation commences and we go more into the luteal phase, we want to stay away so much from intermittent fasting because we need more of like routine food and energy, especially in that second half of our cycle. So once ovulation starts to occur, that's around day 14, and the endometrium begins to grow and thicken. And in addition to the follicle or the eggs, the FSH hormone causes the egg to grow during days 10 through 14. When we hit ovulation at day 14, where there's a sudden increase in now the luteinizing hormone, which acts almost like a little whip, right? And helps us to release the egg. After the egg releases, that's when we're done with ovulation. And now we're in what's called the luteal phase. So the luteal phase is a shorter phase. Sometimes some individuals might have a lengthened follicular phase as hormones start to change or with different hormonal conditions, right? So that's days 15 through 28 is the luteal phase. That's where the egg leaves the ovaries and begins to travel through those fallopian tubes to the uterus. And that's when we want to do a little less like HIIT training, high intensity interval training, a little less high intensity cardio or inflammatory heavy weightlifting during that portion of our cycle. and those last 2 weeks, and that's where progesterone is going to start to rise, like you see here. This purple line is progesterone starting to rise here in that luteal phase. And then the progesterone requires carbohydrates, right? So often that's why we don't really want a lot of intermittent fasting going on, a lot of extra stress on the body. Or often we find individuals who we love to pieces, but they're trying to do all the right things and they think they have to cut their carbs too much. And sometimes they're not eating enough carbs and there's not enough to really make progesterone. So progesterone requires carbohydrates like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes are more complex carbs that are rich in fiber. And progesterone starts to rise, which utilizes those carbohydrates, which is why some of us can get some of those like sweet cravings, or we might need a little magnesium, which could indicate like those chocolate cravings, right? During around that time. So this helps our body to prepare the uterine lining for pregnancy. And if there's no implantation, of course, from sperm, the estrogen and the progesterone start to drop. I just want to make sure everyone's, sorry, here we go. So they will start to drop now going into that other part of the phase. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, here we go. So during these phases, you don't want to, oh no, where was I? I just had that. Okay, so especially during this phase when we're in like perimenopause or menopause, something that we like to promote is natural cycles so that you're knowing, okay, am I in my follicular phase, my luteal phase? Am I taking too long in one end of the cycle or not? I personally really like natural cycles or using like my Aura ring because it will take my temperature first thing in the morning. And I don't even have to think about using a thermometer when I wake up, and it'll tell me where I am, so long as if I'm not utilizing birth control, right? So it allows you to plot your cycle so you can start to see when you might be ovulating, but that you would confirm that with cervical mucus and of course testing like LH hormones, so you can start to better identify your cycle, but also the symptoms that you're experiencing at different parts of your cycle. So once we're coming through here, after the luteal phase commences is when we'll start that cycle all over again and go more into menstruation, right? So cycles are supposed to be about 28 to about 35 days long. However, if you're starting to notice cycles lasting a little longer, around age 40, around 47 is around you see the early transition from menopause. So cycles are mostly regular, maybe from spotting, maybe to some missed months. And then the second stage, which I'll bring us here, right? So ages 3A and 3B, right, is when you start to see late stage reproductive years in our 40s typically. 47 is the usual onset. And then you want to start to test like your FSH hormone. At that point, FSH is still normal. It gives you a good baseline to see what you're comparing to. There's lower ovarian reserve. So estrogen's made in all different parts of the body, but specifically estradiol is made by your ovaries, right? So as we start to go into this transition, our ovaries start to decrease output of estrogen, right? So we'd want to be testing our estradiol to see where we're starting from and maybe how that's changing over time. Cycles may still be regular around this time in our life cycle, and fertility is still possible, right? When cycles start to be more irregular, so maybe greater than 7 days, that can be stage 2, more like early onset of menopause. The first menses starting to skip a few months. So now we're really noticing that we might be in the periphase, shorter cycles, lower progesterone is occurring. Phase 1, now going from 2 to phase 1 is, of course, just move this over so everyone can see, is late stage. So greater than 60 days between cycles, right? So now we're seeing like 2 months in between getting our periods. FSH is starting to get higher and going up and up and up. So FSH is over 25. Symptoms are most likely at that time. So it's FSH is working with LH to spit out the eggs, of course, and this can last up to 3 years. So this is a time that some people are not feeling super comfortable. Different symptoms like hot flashes are starting to arise and night sweats. When we start to, I know for me, my poor fiance, I'll be like so hot and sweaty right before I get my period. And it's because estrogen will just start to like drop. So that's a sign with hot flashes that estrogen is dropping, right? So phases 1A and 1B is early postmenopause now. So it's been 12 months, it's been a full year without a period. So now it's amenorrhea, which means no period or no menses, right? And now we're experiencing many of these symptoms that I'll go into, and this can last around 2 to 6 years of time. So some symptoms can include headaches, right? Because of the changes with the LH and the FSH, which is regulated by our pituitary gland in our brain. Hot flashes because estrogen starting to decrease. We might see different symptoms like hair loss, not everybody, heart palpitations, skin changes. Estrogen helps with elasticity in our skin, as well as uterine changes. So like the changes in the cycles that we had been discussing, potential weight gain, just that, or weight changes. So estrogen causes us to store more body fat in our hips and buttocks. And however, when estrogen starts to decline, we start to see more storage in the abdominal section in the terms of like visceral fat in our midsection. And part of that is because estrogen is cardioprotective, and that is one feature of estrogen is it keeps us more pear-shaped and less apple-shaped, right? So that's where different heart health risks can occur from due to these changes in estrogen in part, right? So we can see changes in our bones, psychological changes, dizziness, poor memory, anxiety, mood swings, just to name a few things, right? Breast tenderness tends to arise as estrogen is changing. But one thing that gives us solace is we are never alone. There is typically about 50 million women in the United States currently going through menopause at one time. The average age that periods tend to end is about 51. So goodbye period. I don't have to deal with that anymore. That is a blessing in itself. Greater than 5% of those in early menopause, greater than 5% of those with early menopause have some kind of unrelated health condition. So that's why it's important to talk with your medical provider as you're going through this, or working with a dietitian, of course, to help manage from a food and lifestyle standpoint. 12 months pass without a period, and that's how you can know that you're officially in menopause, and 8 possible years of going through this gradual transition. So then next we move more into now like the positive, right? Like what are we going to try to do to fix this, right? So we've seen these changes. I've already talked about the roles of estrogen, right? There's maintenance of bone health, cellular division, heart disease protection, and storage and distribution of body fat. We already touched on that. And of course, we see the changes that deduced estrogen can cause. So we want to move more into like following a Mediterranean pattern of eating or an anti-inflammatory pattern of eating, right? So I'm going to move this here. Okay. So you can see that this is like the new take on the food pyramid. It's not adapted by the USDA, of course. The USDA still utilizes MyPlate, which is also a great tool still. But something to highlight is we want to make the basis of our foods more like plants, right? So what's the common denominator of these two bottom tiers involving food? It's all these foods are minimally processed plants, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, beans and legumes, olives, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, just to name a few. As you go up, of course, dairy can be a part of a healthy diet if it is not causing personal inflammation or intolerance in your body. This is where there's a unique tie for this, we like to recommend more so lower fat dairy. Not that we're being fat phobic, but dietary fat when it comes from, say, animals, right? Like we're humans, humans are animals. Our fat is solid at room temperature, right? When certain fats are solid at room temperature, it's more likely to be a saturated fat that could increase our risk for heart disease. So when we do have dairy, we want to try to aim for like a low fat cottage cheese, a low fat Greek yogurt, and then add in, say, chia seeds or ground flax seeds with some fruit to that breakfast item. As we work our way up, we want to aim for. I've kind of changed my ism. I used to say swims, flies, or grows from the ground, but now I really want to say swims, flies, grows from the ground, or eats grass. So leaner proteins are going to be a little lower in calories, which helps with maintaining a healthy weight. However, the red meat is not necessarily the devil. We want to choose red meats that are grass fed. So when the animals start to eat more of a natural diet of what they're intended to have, like the grass, for example, versus industrial agricultural corn and soy, the quality of their fat starts to change and becomes more omega-3 rich, anti-inflammatory, and beneficial, and less saturated fats, right? The same concept applies to eggs as well, but different terminology, right? So eggs, instead of saying grass-fed, they may say pasture raised or free range, right? So when you see that yolk that's more of like a vibrant orange color, or compared to like an Eggland's Best that's like a dull yellow, that color comes from not just the increase in omega-3s, but also there's more vitamin A and vitamin E in grass-fed meats and free range or pasture-raised eggs than in typical agricultural feedlot meat or like eggs, for example. And of course, red meat and sweets go towards the top. Of course, mostly sweets we want to try to keep to a minimal, but of course, we want to honor our cravings and have different sweet swaps. So it's always good to work with a dietitian to explain, hey, like I'm getting this craving, what can I swap instead for those specific things? So eating together with loved ones is actually the base of this pyramid. It just couldn't make it on the slide. So of course it helps to reduce stress. Water should always be the primary beverage, but of course herbal teas can also be good in a healthy diet. And we want to try to aim for 2 or more servings of seafood a week. We'll get more into omega-3s later on in the presentation, but aiming for fatty fish like salmon or tuna can be great choices as well. So next, weight management, plan for our bodies, more metabolic, slowing down. So of course, like we were talking about, the Mediterranean diet, if we increase our intake in cruciferous vegetables, it can help to maintain these estrogen changes that are going on. We want to try to have 2 to 3 cups per day of cruciferous vegetables. So what counts in that category? Cruciferous vegetables are going to be more so like believe it or not, okay, back in the day before our foods were modified, they were all one big plant. So it was like your broccoli, your cauliflower, more like the flowers of the plant. Kale is like more the leaves of the plant. And then Brussels sprouts are also a part of that cruciferous vegetable family. So some individuals experience digestive discomfort with these foods because there is a little bit more roughage. You want to definitely try, if you can have things raw, okay, but you don't have to fight through that. You can cook it. And if you can try to cut through it with the side of a fork, that's typically a sign that it's cooked well enough that it may ease digestion. But if at that point it's still not a tolerable food, we can lean towards other fruits and vegetables as means. You don't want to be getting all bloated and gassy and uncomfortable in your day just to try to get this in. Stick to lean proteins like we were just talking about, choosing complex starches. So we want to keep our fiber intake high. Fiber is associated with an anti-inflammatory diet, which menopause can start to increase inflammation, which puts us at risk for these different chronic health conditions, right? So complex starches would be more so like your beans and legumes, even though they have a touch of protein in them, which is great, more than a touch, a moderate amount of protein. Complex starches are also like our potatoes, our sweet potatoes, our peas, our corn. Also, it's going to be our whole grains, right? So of course, whole grains are not the devil, but we would want to nudge you more towards plants, right? Potatoes used to get a really bad rap, I think, because they get associated with French fries. Um, but potatoes, especially I'm picturing like the roasted red potatoes, right? Sweet potatoes, if you can tolerate the skin, it's a great source of fiber and nutrients, and also help your gut microbiome to regulate at this time as well, because it helps your gut microbiome to create what's called butyrate, right? So we have these bugs in our intestines that are like another organ, right? And they help us out. And when these, more beneficial bugs eat the fiber resistant starch from potatoes, it actually gives off byproducts just like us. They burp and things. And one of those byproducts is butyrate, which helps to scavenge what's called LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, which go into circulation again from the colon through the portal vein and can cause inflammatory issues in the bloodstream that are starting to be linked to heart disease. So a moderate portion of having like some potatoes with some grass-fed steak and some broccoli for dinner can be a great hormone balancing meal, for example. You can work with a dietitian one-on-one, of course, to know what your specific portions per meal and meal timing of those starches would be most appropriate for you. Green tea is a great antioxidant rich beverage that you can lean on as well. Just note it does have caffeine, sometimes more caffeine than coffee, but it does have a little bit slower of a caffeine spike, which can prevent us from, spiking our cortisol a little too high, which we'll get to later on down the road of why we want to try to control our cortisol and our stress to try to spare our adrenal reserves of estrogen. So pre and probiotics might be good to take, help to balance out that microbiome, which does in turn help to balance out the different estrogens in our body, as some estrogen is actually made in the gut. Ground flax seeds are a great resource as well. Research shows that 4 to 7 tablespoons for about 12 weeks can help to decrease night sweats and help with weight loss, right? Because it helps you to feel full, can help to balance blood sugars in that they're fibrous and loaded in healthy fat, but they also help to promote increasing estrogen in the body when we're starting to deduce estrogen. Soy isoflavones, we'll get more into soy later in the presentation, but soy is not the devil. We just want to aim for minimally processed soy if we have no history or family history of estrogen dominant cancers. Mind our meal timing. We want to try to eat routinely throughout the day. Like I was saying, intermittent fasting is not really the greatest for us ladies. It can also cause more stress when we're going longer bouts of time without eating. Think back to like hunter-gatherer days and how we evolved. The males tended to go out on these long hunts that would have more like fasts. So females would tend to be more gatherers, eating and grazing more throughout the day. And it's in part how we started to evolve. When we go larger gaps of time without eating, we're more likely to tap into our cortisol hormone, which can cause that to spike a little high for what's high for us and cause a downstream effect that causes us to go away from making more estrogen, which we'll go more into. Cut portions if we need to. I don't want to promote like under eating, right? But I think it's just about being aware of what our portions need to be. Be aware of health saboteurs. So pro-inflammatory foods like processed foods, especially out of a box or a bag with ingredients that we don't even know the name of. Feedlot red meat is more what I would say versus grass-fed red meat, which is more beneficial about 1 to 2 times a week, because we still want to watch risk for colon cancer when it comes to red meat. However, refined sugars would be more of the issue, I feel, to watch out for in terms of it spiking our insulin and throwing off our insulin related hormones and blood sugar related hormones. We want to look for triggers for emotional eating or feeling based eating, like stress, for example, as well. So now we're going to go more into like important nutrients to highlight, especially during this time in our lifespans. So iron, calcium, vitamin D, omega-3s, phytoestrogens, and protein/collagen is part what we're going to go into next. So iron, so many people will come to me that's saying, okay, I'm trying to lose weight and I just can't lose weight. It can actually, if you're iron deficient, impact one's ability to lose weight, believe it or not. So some signs of deficiency can be extreme fatigue, can also be a sign of thyroid dysfunction as well. uh, Weakness, pale skin, right? Chest pain, fast heartbeat. So part of what I was talking about earlier is that like irregular heartbeat, right? That's associated with perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. So iron can play a key role in this. Being that menses is starting to commence, we're not losing as much blood. So our iron needs do start to change, which do make it easier to reach our iron needs, which I'll get to in a moment. Cold hands and feet, inflammation or soreness in like your tongue can be a sign of more extreme iron fatigue. Brittle nails, because we're lacking resources to actually make our nails, because our nails, hair, and skin are less likely to get the resources if other areas of the body need those nutrients. Unusual craving for like non-nutritive sweetened substances, which could be like ice, dirt, starch, right? Like, so some people get like pica, right? Could be an example. Poor appetite, especially in more so children though. So, but anemia can give more of that fatigue. And if you're feeling more fatigued, it can be harder to get the food in that you need. The functions of iron is of course growth and development. We're already past that. We're good there, all of us. Helps to, more importantly, deliver oxygen throughout our bodies, and oxygen is our lifeblood, right? It allows our metabolism to do its job. So if we're not getting oxygen appropriately to our tissues, it can especially lead to extreme fatigue, but then there's a downstream effect to that. Helps maintain our energy levels, because then if oxygen is not getting delivered to what needs to be utilizing it, it can definitely impact our energy, and of course allow us to use our muscles. So those are just some functions. There's a lot more functions of iron. So iron can be extremely unique. Certain people have different genetic conditions. Like I know I'm prone for hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, having too much iron. So that's why it's super important to apply the philosophies of individualized medicine and getting a full iron panel and talking with your provider about it. We can always run that here at Functional Nutrition RX, and we can run a full iron panel as part of your nutritional treatment, just to make sure there's no suboptimal levels and that you are running as most efficiently as possible, right? Signs of hemochromatosis is actually kind of similar to iron deficiency. That's why it's just easier to run the labs and look at what someone's eating in the diet. So you still see the heart flutters, the weakness, the fatigue, and different pains in the body. But unexplained weight loss is more so associated with this, where someone's not really able to lose weight if they're iron deficient. With people who take extra vitamin C, it can help to boost iron. If you are deficient in iron, or cooking with like a cast iron pan is something as well. But again, it's super individualized. These are just some tests that you can ask for if you think you might be at risk for high iron, but your doctor would also know that as well. Iron sources. So for those who are menstruating, iron needs are about 18 milligrams per day. And when we are not menstruating, right, as we enter menopause, our needs start to change to about 8 milligrams per day. So something gets a little easier, right? We don't have to have as much iron, which is nice to have to consider in the diet, but it's still something to look at. So your high iron foods, of course, like fortified foods, like breakfast cereals, like oatmeal, for example. Oysters are a great source. Of course, like your proteins, like your meats, like your chicken and beans, to name a few. Tofu are also higher iron sources. Next is calcium. So of course, as our hormones start to change, we're more prone for different thyroid dysfunctioning. So our calcium needs might change, and we have an increased risk for osteopenia, osteoporosis. So of course, we want to get screened, maybe complete a DEXA scan so that you're able to compare over time what the strength of your bones essentially, and also to screen for osteoporosis, osteopenia. Other signs is fractures, specifically in the ankle, the wrist, and hip fractures, to name a few. Teeth, of course, can start to change as well. Problems with blood clotting, abnormal heart rhythm, and blood pressure can be a sign of calcium deficiency. And some people might say, oh, I could just test my blood. No, because the reason why, if you'll see that your blood does get tested for calcium, and that's more for other reasons like kidney functioning, just to name one. However, if someone's deficient, your body could be pulling calcium from the bones and pulling it into the bloodstream to better utilize it. So really, it's more so bone density and diet is how you really look at calcium in the diet. Weakness and fatigue, weak nails, just to name a few. You all have this presentation, of course, to compare to. And calcium is an electrolyte. So if you're seeing tingling in the hands and feet, muscle cramps, could also be a sign of deficiency. Functions of calcium, of course, keeps us nice and strong, builds our bone structure, helps our nerves to carry messages between our brain and body, as it's an electrolyte, right? Helps our muscles to contract, supports normal blood circulation, and helps our bodies to release hormones. So, of course, calcium sources. I think we all have seen the Got Milk ads.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to call you back. I'm watching the nutrition thing from Amanda.
What's it called? So milk, sorry, I just want to take care of that. Perfect. So milk is not your only source, so don't feel stuck if you have lactose intolerance. And we're not always the biggest advocates for drinking glasses of milk. Yogurt, like a nice low-fat Greek yogurt, can be a great source of calcium, as well as orange juice. Still be a little weary of orange juice because it's still, how you say, it, even if it's freshly squeezed, it's just highly glycemic to spike your blood sugars. So how I like to incorporate orange juice into my diet is maybe with like a little seltzer. If like, say I'm out and people are drinking soda and I'm like, ooh, I really want to have something sweet to drink. Like maybe I'll do mostly seltzer and just like a splash or so of OJ. It's not really significant calcium source, but mozzarella cheese, sardines, especially when there's bones with any meat, bone broth can help to leach out some calcium. Soy milk has calcium fortified. And I've even been seeing some almond milks get calcium fortified. So definitely read your packaging. I want to say Silk has been fortifying with calcium. I'm not so sure about Califia, which is one of my favorite brands. It looks like a little genie bottle. So of course, salmon, like your fish with the bones, cottage cheese, and tofu and soybeans are rich in calcium. But you also have leafy greens like spinach and kale, right, that are rich in calcium. I can't overstate the benefits of chia seeds. I'm not really big into the whole superfood marketing concepts, but chia seeds are truly a superfood in that they're rich in omega-3s. They have a moderate amount of protein. They're rich in healthy fat from those omega-3s, and they have a decent amount of calcium in that as well, to name a few, and lots of fiber, about 10 grams and about 1 to 2 tablespoons of chia seeds. Next is, of course, vitamin D, which I think we all learned a lot about vitamin D during the pandemic because it is pivotal for our immune system. Helps us also with K2 and calcium to help build our bones along with other nutrients. It also helps our muscles to contract, helps our nerve system, and supports our immune system. Signs of vitamin D deficiency can be sleep changes, low mood, fatigue, pale skin, and like dark circles around the eyes, chronic infections, meaning more like respiratory, upper respiratory infections, back pain, think like your joints, think like your bones, right? Hurting, loss of appetite, loss of muscle strength. So a lot of these symptoms are very similar, right? We notice from like calcium to iron. So this is an easy test you can run at your primary care physician's office or here with us just to test your vitamin D. And something to note is often people will test their vitamin D like once a year in the winter, and when they're not really outside and it's like dark and dreary in New York. And then they're out in the sun a lot more in the summer. So I definitely like to recommend testing it like twice a year and knowing your dosages for times that you're more outside and absorbing sunlight. And of course, we're not wearing like long sleeves that will block it versus the winter months. If you're getting outside between like when the sun's at its highest peak between like 11 and like 1 or 2, you're going to maximize your vitamin D absorption. About 15 minutes outside is recommended. However, the conundrum with vitamin D is everyone's at risk for deficiency in different ways, right? So body fat accumulation can block vitamin D absorption for some. So people with higher BMIs are a greater risk for vitamin D deficiency. Living in certain areas of the globe, New York, you're at greater risk for deficiency. If you have, let's see, higher melanin pigmentation in your skin, you're at higher risk for vitamin D deficiency. So it hits people often across the board in different ways that I just think it's a good thing just to get tested. The recommended daily allowance, or RDA, is 600 IU per day. Most people I have supplementing about 2000 IU per day just to start. But again, you want to see what your levels are, because you can actually take too much vitamin D and it accumulates in your liver, because vitamins A, D, E, and K, I can't get this other finger, A, D, and K, are fat soluble, and that can accumulate and cause liver toxicity. If you're taking, say, 10,000 IU a day and you don't need it, that could be really adverse to our health. So food sources of vitamin D, however, cod liver oil, trout, salmon, think like your fatty fish, mushrooms, milk, soy, almond, oat milks that are vitamin D fortified, sardines, and some ready to eat fortified cereals like oatmeal. I would question that a little bit though. And this has been taken from the NIH CDC site. Just what I mean by question that is just check the individual brands that you utilize. Eggs are also a decent source of vitamin D. And when you're looking at your labs for vitamin D, a lot of providers will be like, oh, you're 33 and your blood values for vitamin D, we want to keep your vitamin D a little higher, around like 50s, 60s is more what's functionally appropriate for the body, versus more like westernized labs sometimes that looks at just absence of disease. Omega-3s. I cannot understate the benefits of omega-3s, which we will get to. You want to try to aim to have at least 2 servings of fatty fish per week, which is like salmon, tuna, oysters, herring, sardines, anchovies, just to name a few. The reason why we say 2 servings or 2 to 3 servings, if you're starting to go above 3 servings a week, like eating sushi a lot, which is great, okay, but we got to be careful for mercury poisoning when we're starting to go above 3 servings per week. But we don't want to go under 2, because our body doesn't make omega-3s on its own, which makes it what's called an essential fatty acid. So being that it's essential, think like your essential amino acids. Things that are essential, your body cannot make on its own and needs to be taken in. And if it's not taken in, you're deficient. So the reason why it's really important to name these fish sources of omega-3s is there's other sources recommended, like ground flax seeds, chia seeds, to name a few, walnuts, Brussels sprouts, kale, are good sources of omega-3s, but it's specifically what's called ALA omega-3s, where there's EPA, DHA rich omega-3s, and that's like your seafood. So I'm sorry for those who do not like fatty fish out there. We'll supplement. It's easy. Nordic Naturals is a great brand, and Kirkland is also great too. With that being said, the ALA form, I would have to eat pounds of Brussels sprouts, which my stomach would not be happy with, or walnuts, which would drive my calories really, really high, to be able to convert that and actually be able to absorb the proper amount of omega-3s in my body. So fatty fish is ideal. So why do we care so much about omega-3s? So we want to see the body as like a little teeter-totter here on the right. So omega-3s, like the flaxseed, fatty fish, or even alfalfa sprouts, they can help to tip the balance of omega-6s to omega-3s. The average balance in the current American diet is about an 8-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. So omega-6s is like these, what is everyone calling it? The oils like corn, cottonseed, soybean oils that you're seeing in certain foods. Foods that tend to be very high in saturated fats tend to be very high in omega-6s. And what that does is it converts to what's called arachidonic acid here on the left. And fat's main role in the body, there's a lot of roles, but a big role of fats is it makes our cell wall up, right? And we want our cells to be nice and loosey-goosey. We don't want them to be sticky, right? So when it's made out of more of these like solid fats, these omega-6s, it makes our cells more likely to adhere to each other. And think about cellular adherence in terms of the bloodstream, right? If we have sticky blood cells, they're more likely to get stuck on vascular walls and harden and cause clots, versus omega 3s, that when we have more omega 3s, ALA or EPA or DHA in our body, it's actually going to help to build your cell walls out of more, loosey goosey, less sticky materials. So you're not going to see as much cellular adhesion and less of a risk for heart disease and clots and higher calcium scores, right? So something, if you're concerned about this, you can look at testing, of course, like your cholesterol, your lipoprotein A, lipoprotein B, but you can actually start to measure omega 3s in the bloodstream. It's a very expensive test and hard to run. So I think it's also just good to look at the diet. Also, what you can look at is your calcium score to measure your percent of calcification in your arteries to know what kind of risk you're looking at. So long story short is make sure you're eating plenty of omega 3s in the diet in the form of your fatty fish, or supplementing if you don't like fatty fish, but you can still start to incorporate plant-based forms too to give a more of a buffer, a booster, because they also contain other benefits. Phytoestrogens is always a big question and topic. So phytoestrogens are like isoflavonoids or lignans or comestan, and they come in the form of course, soy, bran, flax seeds, beans, and sprouts. So that's part why flax seeds can help to alleviate some of the symptoms of menopause, like hot flashes, because it's actually helping to give the body a natural source of estrogen. So soy, we want to try to be very careful of our sources of it, because it also gets sprayed a lot with pesticides, and we want to try to avoid GMO options. So if we can get non-GMO tofu or soy milk, or I love edamame as it's a good source of protein, and there's not many foods that's a protein and a vegetable at the same time. It's super easy for me to accidentally go too high with my portioning for like trail mix. So I like to dilute my trail mix with a little bit of edamame to boost my protein, but also keep my calories just a little bit lower. So these phytoestrogens help to mimic the estrogen we make in the body to then be utilized. You just want to be careful of avoiding soy isolates. So when I worked at the university, I was a campus dietitian for a little bit. The students were walking around with this drink called Soylent. And I'm like, first of all, awful name for a beverage, if you know the movie. And then second of all, it was mainly soy isolate was the main protein source. And you usually see pea protein as like the plant-based protein source, not soy isolates, because it's just so concentrated and typically often high in pesticides that you want to avoid it, and it can cause almost like a hyperbolized response. And of course, best to avoid. So when you read the labels, like Quest bars or One bars tend to have it. I'm noticing some of their flavors, they're switching out for like whey concentrate or isolate, which is better, but there's still like more processed bars. That the raw rev bars are good, or the Kind protein bars. Kind actually just came out with Kind Max protein, which is great, 20 grams of protein. So with the bars, more minimally processed, the better. Next is protein, right? So derived from the word proteose, right? Meaning primary. It's the most plentiful source in the body. So protein is used to make every cell in our body. It is essential. If we are not getting enough protein, our body is not functioning efficiently. So just as glucose is the smallest form of carbohydrates, and fatty acids are the smallest form of fats, amino acids are the smallest breakdown form of protein. So we want to try to get a variety of all of our essential amino acids in our diet by eating proteins, of course, like meat. But if we're vegan, vegetarian, that's okay too. We want to look at combining different things like beans and rice or peas and pasta that help to make a complete protein source of these amino acids. The protein is constantly being broken down and built in the body at the same time, meaning that my body could be breaking down muscle to build up enzymes in my stomach, right? Protein, it has 20 amino acids. 8 out of the 20 cannot be produced in the body and are considered essential. So, like I just said, protein helps to make our digestive enzymes in our stomach. Sometimes some people are experiencing just different digestive discomforts during this time. So, if we're not eating enough protein, it can actually prevent our body from making enough enzymes, which actually break down food. And if we don't have enough enzymes, we're going to feel more bloat and discomfort and potentially gas and slower motility throughout the GI tract and constipation. Antibodies, of course, so protein helps to build our immune system up. Remember, it's part of every cell of the body. Supports regulation and expression of DNA and RNA. It's how our body talks to itself, and other ways too, of course. Supports our muscle, right? So muscle is the fountain of youth, and I cannot understate that. So muscle serves as like a little metabolic motor. So the reason why men can burn more calories than us is they tend to have more testosterone, and then of course more muscle because of that more testosterone. So that muscle works as a motor for burning glucose and making it into ATP or energy, right? So when we have less muscle, we're not burning as many calories. Our metabolism is much lower and slower, right? So we want to definitely emphasize strength training. And especially with strength training, the USDA in the past few years had changed their exercise recommendation, not just to recommend at a minimum of 1 to 2 times a week strength training, but also to maximize time off in between, right? So when you're strength training, you actually are burning more glucose more efficiently within the 24 hours after you're exercising. It also helps to build our hormones, of course, too. So next is, what does 20 grams of protein look like? We'll save this on the PowerPoint for you guys to look at later. And of course, you want to definitely incorporate this in your meals. Usually about 20 grams is sufficient for most people, but of course, you want to check in and get your individualized needs assessed. Collagen is a foundational substance in the body. It's a protein, and it's the main component of various connective tissues in our body. So there's 3 different types of collagen, 1, 2, and 3. 2 is the most primarily distributed form in our body. I love the Vital Proteins collagen. I'll put that in my coffee in the morning when I have my breakfast, just to give me an extra boost of about 20 grams of protein. It also helps with elasticity in our skin to combat those changes in estrogen that occur and causes deduced elasticity. So, of course, other sources of collagen is fish, eggs, organ meats that's on the bone. I'm not usually a big fan of, like, say, chicken wings, right? But it's actually a good source of collagen, along with spirulina, which is good to add to your smoothies. Foods that don't contain collagen, right? Fruits, vegetables, grains, although they're good for other things. You want to try to maximize absorption of collagen. So, of course, we don't want to have coffee on an empty stomach. But with that being said, we want to try to have other, like, even if we're putting coffee with the Vital Proteins in it, we want to still try to have fruit and eggs and other things with our meal. By having that fruit, you are maximizing your vitamin C, which will help you to absorb more of that collagen. Zinc and sulfur also can help to cause more of an increase in your collagen absorption. Like oysters are a great source of zinc. And of course, like sulfur from onions, broccoli, garlic. Of course, zinc, you could see the sources here on the side. Next is there's endocrine disruptors. So I'm not going to go into each of these. We want to just be aware that endocrine disruptors, so these are just different forms to look at a later date. We could do a whole presentation on just this. What they do is you have a normal hormone response, right? So this is your hormone, these like green little triangles. And what they're doing is they're coming into the cell and they're binding to this little receptor, this orange guy, right? And when they bind, it unlocks the door to allow a cascade response for the hormone to do its job. However, there's hormone mimetics, right, that will bind and cause more of like sometimes like a hyperbolized estrogen response, or hormone blockers that actually bind to that receptor and stop those hormones from even working and initiating a response. So, sorry, door's locked. So often these endocrine disruptors are found in our, bottoms of our shoes, right? So different Asian cultures that, recommend taking, in their culture that they take off, their shoes before they come in the door is a very important thing to prevent those things from coming in, reducing pesticides and eating organic, opening up the windows, cleaning with endocrine disruptor free products, which are really good to look at from the Think Dirty app, which is run by the Environmental Working Group, EWG, or a Yucca. So you can scan these products, your cleaning products, your cosmetics, if they contain different endocrine disruptors that were listed on this page. And of course, like making sure you're not drinking out of water bottles that contain BPAs or other phenols, because sometimes they replace BPA with other chemicals that's still in that same phenol class. Sneaky, sneaky. So effects of chronic stress on the body. We want to go into stress. I think stress is one of the biggest issues for us ladies, right? So brain and nervous system, it activates that fight or flight response, which is going to cause our body to pull more glucose into the bloodstream and can actually go affecting our acidity in our body and cause our cortisol to go higher. Our adrenal glands, like I was just mentioning, release more cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And I thought I had something in here. Hold on. Oh, okay. So we'll go into this here. So your adrenals, they are like your 401k of your hormones, specifically estrogen, right? And our ovaries are more like our paycheck, right? So we want to be sparing of our 401k, right? And we want to be saving into that. So what I mean by that is if we're constantly going into high stress and revving up our cortisol, your adrenal glands, which are these little walnut-sized glands on the top of your kidneys, their job is to help make estrogen in part, but also their job is to make cortisol when we're really stressed in that fight or flight response. So when we're pumping out lots of cortisol, our body's not going towards making more estrogen to be able to utilize, right? So when you're doing that, you're tapping into your reserves essentially, and it's affecting your ability to maintain more estrogen in later years post menopause. So we want to try to keep our stress low, of course, but we can also focus on different mineral cocktails that can help with this as well, like magnesium, to name a few. Heart and blood vessels, right, are contracting and more overused. It increases risk for heart disease, digestion, less blood flow to digestive organs. So of course, you're going to see more bloating, nausea, appetite changes, loss of appetite as food isn't moving as regularly through the GI tract when we're overtly stressed. And it's of course going to tap into our thyroid health as well. So, oh, this is where it was. It was just too tiny. I couldn't see it. So with that being said, this is what I was trying to go into with the cortisol. So if your body is going to make more cortisol here, it's shutting down this whole process here of making dehydroepiestrogen, and of course, downstream making that estrogen. So the body is starting to prioritize cortisol over estrogen. And these are your adrenals right here, right on top of your kidneys. So adrenal support, you want to, of course, focus on stress, right? And what triggers that stress, working with a mental health provider, focusing on your sleep, right? If you're not sleeping regularly, it can affect your stress and your cortisol. By that, you want to start to try to, if you're not already, going to bed at the same time and trying to wake up at the same time each day and trying to get at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So ways to support your adrenals is by doing different mineral cocktails that can work, using unrefined salt like Celtic sea salt. Bone broth is rich in electrolytes that are rich in these adrenal support minerals. Nettle infusion or nettle leaf tea is also really rich in calcium, which can also help in other ways, right? Mineral electrolyte cocktails like trace mineral drops are awesome to utilize. That's going to be in your cheat sheet that we have made from this presentation. Avoid fasting through breakfast, right? That's going to pump out more cortisol if you're going long gaps of time without eating. Make it a point to have like a oatmeal with some protein powder and some fruit with some ground flax seeds or chia seeds in the morning. Maybe in your coffee, put a little bit of the collagen peptides by Vital Proteins in there, and really start your day off with a strong amount of protein, which also helps to control our appetite throughout the day and our blood sugars in the early part of the morning. Include high quality carbohydrates in your day. Include a paired snack of a carb, because if you're not getting enough carbs, that can also stress your body out too. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. No longer than 4 to 5 hours without eating. Add the cruciferous vegetables like we were talking about. And they also have that sulfur component to it from especially broccoli sprouts, which we were talking about before, helps to absorb that collagen as well. Bottom line is, most importantly, prioritizing stress reduction, because we can, treat the stress, but if we reduce the stress, it's going to be a lot easier. How stress and high cortisol impact your health. You can look at this at a later date, but you can see increased breathing, increasing glucose in the body, increasing blood pressure, just to name a few. Next is stress management, though. Now, how am I actually going to take care of this stress, right? We all live in New York, and the New York minute is getting shorter and shorter, I think. I think it's the New York second now. So what I mean by that is deep breathing, right? Taking deep breaths can actually help to lower your heart rate. I love box breathing. So breathing in for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds. Progressive relaxation is also a great tool. You can do it in multiple different ways. You can start at your toes and squeeze them really, really tight. Like if you're having trouble falling asleep, let them go. Squeeze your calves really, really tight. Let that go. Go up to your quads and your hamstrings and work your way all the way up the body. You can also use your hand for progressive relaxation by squeezing some parts like your mid palm of your hand and squeezing out your pinky. And same with your ring finger, right? As you go through each finger, that's a form of progressive relaxation. Body scan meditations, rhythmic movement, mindful exercise like Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, visualization. I'm sitting on a beach in Capri, yoga, of course, physical activity, can all name a few, but I also think that's important to get time with loved ones as a way of managing stress and getting some time away from heavy workloads and chaotic home lives. So just get some time away at the beach or going for a walk outside and getting some sunlight in the morning. Sleep impacts our hormones for sure. Sleep also helps to lower our risk for Alzheimer's disease, decreases our risk for heart disease, reduces our stress and anxiety, our mood, and also can impact our cravings throughout the day. So when we're sleep deprived, we're more likely to increase our calories by about 270 calories is what the research had said, but it's not exact for everybody, of course. And we're more prone to go towards sugar and saturated fats. So when we are sleep deprived, it's really good to go towards those sweet swaps and honor that craving, but try to maximize what we're putting in, right? So if I'm craving hot chocolate, maybe I'm going to use that LMNT plus electrolytes, right? So it helps to help my adrenals, and mix that with a little bit of protein powder with some hot water to honor that craving, but also swap it out with a better option, right? So this you can also look at on the side of ways that sleep can impact our body. Most importantly, we need to look at the benefits, right? Improves our memory and cognition, reduces stress, improves mood, helps to promote a healthy microbiome, can help us to build muscle, right? And is super important for detox. Sleep, what if I'm a shift worker? These are just some tips to look at if you are a shift worker that tends to work night shifts, like looking at noise canceling earplugs, blackout shades, keeping the phone on silent, and creating a winding down routine, I think is pivotal for all of us before bed. Maybe taking a little magnesium glycinate, doing some stretching or some light reading, turning off the TV, especially if it's overtly stimulating or frustrating, if it's certain triggers for us. I'm not watching Game of Thrones right before I fall asleep. This is the 8-3-2-1 method. So we want to aim to stop drinking caffeine 8 hours before bed. if anyone's ever done one of those 23andMe tests, that maybe we're poor detoxifiers of caffeine, maybe looking at stopping caffeine around 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, of course. 3 o'clock is typically the golden rule, but see what works best for you. Aim to stop eating about 3 hours before bed. I would say 2 to 3 hours, of course, to make it more realistic. Aim to stop drinking water too much before bed because it'll be waking us up throughout the night, about 2 hours before. Aim to reduce blue light and stress about 1 hour before bed. So trying your winding down routine for about an hour, at least a half hour to start before bed, and aim to hit the snooze 0 times. Physical activity, of course, is pivotal for stress management. And also, of course, promoting our muscle and promoting a healthy weight. I just love it for stress management a ton for all of us, especially when we're working out with loved ones or in a class setting. Focus on reframing your definition of exercise if this is something that you struggle with. I know in the past I was always like an athlete, and I remember in college it was always like associated in a sense with like work or punishment or things, right? Coaches making you run the hill kind of situation. So for some, it's reframing. If you're maybe coming from an institutionalized setting like law enforcement per se, right? It was always associated with work, but doing things that make you happy. If it's paddleboarding, kayaking, playing pickleball, playing volleyball, weightlifting, yoga, tai chi, Pilates, do what works for you and something. If you want it to be an environment that you want to be in, because then you're going to keep going back to it. Practice mindful movement, explore forms of movement that you personally enjoy, right? Like if it's a class and you're like, oh, I look forward to seeing, my friend Elise in class, and that's half of why I go, is just to socialize with my friends. And oh, I get the side effect of exercising, rock and roll. Work out in your own terms. Peel back the layers and figure out your why. Why am I working out? What do I want to do? Oh, I want to focus on increasing muscle. I want to lose body fat. I want to focus on mobility, or I really want to work with the trainer so then I can learn more about my muscular imbalances that I have going on so that I can age well for myself, that I can reduce injuries so that I can keep, walking in my 90s and doing these activities and maintaining my home. Don't work out to eat to work out. I see a lot of this of, oh, I'm going to go run a mile just because I want to go and eat this snack or things. More so seeing it as it's fueling your workout, not the inverse. Take rest days. I have seen people, coming at it with such a good intention, but they want to work out like 7 days a week, and that's not healthy. Your body needs time to rest and restore. So looking at maybe anywhere from where you're starting, right? If we're starting at 0, maybe 2 times a week. If we're further along, you don't really want to exercise more than 5 to 6 times a week at the most. And of course, patience is a virtue. Good things take time. Rome wasn't built in a night. It's not going to happen overnight for us to be able to just up and run a 5K. It takes a lot of work and time sometimes, and that's okay. And that's what makes the journey worth it. Dietary strategies for managing menopause. Of course, we did a whole presentation just now on that. But of course, avoid some trigger foods, right? Caffeine, alcohol, spicy foods, sugar, right? Soy and isoflavones, we want to incorporate in our diet. They can help to minimize symptoms. Different countries like China and Japan and some Western countries, Australia, right? They tend to eat China, Japan, and Australia tend to eat a little bit more soy isoflavones in their diet. So they have a 20% incidence of, say, hot flashes. But us in more like westernized countries, we have more of an 85% incidence of hot flashes because our diet is more pro-inflammatory. So by reducing inflammation in our body, and of course, supporting our hormones specifically for hot flashes by having like more tofu in our diet, soy, edamame to an extent. And also, of course, those ground flax seeds can help to manage that. Complex carbohydrates actually help with sleep. So I know so many people have really good intent to have just like meat and vegetables at night. Maybe they heard that, the carbs spike them too much before they go to sleep. Of course, if you're giving yourself 2, 3 hours before bed, that's okay. And the carbs actually help to create serotonin in your gut. Your gut makes about like 80 to 90% of your serotonin. So if you're not eating carbs, you're not getting that feel good boost. And of course, like carbs are fruits, carbs are vegetables, carbs are beans, carbs are, of course, like your whole grains. So there's good foods. And if I don't eat enough of those, quote unquote, and I don't like using good and bad because it's morality association, but if I don't eat enough of those more beneficial carbs, I'm going to go more towards those not so great carbs like refined carbohydrates, which are going to be more pro inflammatory in my body, like sugars or like white starches. If I'm craving pasta, I'm going towards chickpea pasta, for example. So there's alternative therapies for menopause management, like different herbs and nutritional supplements. So it's just really important to note that the United States is the wild, wild west when it comes to supplements on the market. So it's unregulated by the FDA unless you want to make a claim and let them know that you had an adverse effect. Then they start to look into it, but they're not going to look into it before it goes on the shelf. The quality and standard of herbal preparations of those over the counter and online vary so much considerably between different brands. And it's really important to work with reputable providers and wholesalers and companies to know what you're putting in your system. So what you can do is look for USP, consumer labs, test a lot of products, drug-free sport. So we like to utilize full scripts, which also helps to regulate this market in the supplements that we like to recommend. We're very cautious of this for third-party testing. So of course, working with a registered dietitian or provider on your supplement sourcing is extremely, extremely important. I'm not even kidding. You can get anything off the shelf and it can contain sawdust if it's not actually tested appropriately. So common treatments could be black cahoose, evening primrose oil, donkey, vitex or chaste tree, or I like to just say vitex, stinging nettle root tea, which is not just, good, of course, for calcium sourcing as well. These supplements can be helpful at managing different concerns, of course. So the stinging nettle leaf is also good for your joint health, allergy health, and urinary health. Black cohosh helps to minimize symptom relief and helps with bone health. And Donkey helps with menstrual and menopause symptom relief regarding to our blood. And Vitex helps with hormonal balance if we're seeing low estrogen going on in the body or just big swings in hormones. But of course, working with a provider one-on-one to know what works best for you is important. Know, read your labels, especially. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So it's about taking small steps at a time, right? And many of us like talk about it, but we got to start putting action to it. But then we want to not get too overwhelmed when we do put action to it. So with that being said, we want to pick what's our why. What's going on? Why do I want to focus on my hormone health, right? Is it that I want to control my hot flashes because it's making me really uncomfortable at work? Do I want to focus on my hormone health so I could sleep a little better because I'm getting a lot of intense cravings when I don't sleep well? Do I want to focus on my hormone health because I'm feeling a little uncomfortable in my body and I'm not feeling like my normal self? Everyone has their own whys, and that's okay. But then you want to make your plan around your why, right? Because sometimes if nutrition can get very convoluted and there's a lot of different things to try that you want to tailor to you. You want to ask yourself, can I see myself eating and drinking this way for the rest of my life, right? It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change. We want to set milestone goals, like SMART goals. In my sessions and with when you're working with a dietitian, we like to set specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, or I like to say realistic and time-bound goals, meaning, picking, 1 to 3 things in a session of what you're going to really focus in on. Maybe I'm going to try chia seeds and ground flax seeds, and maybe I'm going to focus on eating a protein rich breakfast. So you know what you're what actions you're going to be taking. Create awareness, right? Logging creates awareness of your food. Be activity minded. Hey, I've just been sitting for this long presentation that Amanda's giving. I'm going to get a little movement in, maybe straighten up a little things around the house, get some steps in, maybe throw the ball for the dog outside for a little bit before I go to bed. And most importantly, I'm sorry, this is cutting out. Fail to prepare or prepare to fail, meaning that, take time, go to the grocery store, make a list, meal prep a few meals or a few items for the week for yourself so that you're not left stranded when you're in the middle of a busy day. Build your team. You have people that can support you in your family, your friends, but also within your medical team, your dietitians, your providers. Start talking about it. You might be surprised what doors you open up when you start manifesting and talking about things with, loved ones or people that care about you. But does anybody have any questions? Okay. And most importantly, I just want to say thank you for everybody.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, you have the chat. Oh, thank you.
Sorry, it's Jody. I figured I'd just type it.
That's okay.
It
There's like 4 questions there.
Let me see.
vitamin
Okay.
D, what is the best type and time of day to take it?
So
Vitamin combined with other vitamins? Question mark.
that's
So,
a
like,
very good question.
Sometimes they say like vitamin D with K, and there's just so many different types of vitamin Ds. It gets very overwhelming. So
Very good question. Vitamin D3 with K2 is great. I like the Seeking Health brand just because I can always find it on Full Scripts and it's never sold out, and it's a third-party tested brand. Pure Encapsulations is also another great brand. It's just always sold out for me. That's another one you can look at as well. And believe it or not, Kirkland is always highly rated on Consumer Labs. So Consumer Labs is a site that actually tests these supplements and tells you cost effectiveness, if it contains what it says it's going to contain, and proper dosing. When it comes to vitamin D, time of day doesn't really matter as much when you take the supplement. You want to pick a time of day that you're going to be most consistent with. So personally, I keep my vitamin D in the fridge because it's fat soluble. I keep my omega-3s in the fridge. I keep my vitamin C that I put on my skin on the fridge, so it doesn't go bad. Ground flax seeds and chia seeds in the fridge because they're more fat soluble, right? Not vitamin C though. So what I'm saying with that is if you take an omega-3 supplement, that's fat soluble as well. The vitamin D and the omega-3, being that they're both fat soluble, are going to be more easily absorbed together with like a fat in your meal. So say you have eggs in the morning for breakfast, those yolks have fat, or if you're putting the ground flax seeds or the chia seeds in some oatmeal or some Greek yogurt, that's also dietary fat. It'll help that to be absorbed. Right, so vitamin D, and what's the best type? So D3K2, vitamin D combined with other nutrient, perfect. Time between meals, best. Okay, so that's actually a very good question, but very individualized, right? So we'll say like 3 to 5 hours, but you want to start to align. It's called interoceptive awareness, right? Like being aware of, right, what our body's saying and feeling. So it's like the hunger fullness scale of 0 to 10. 0, I say, is like, I'm starving, Marvin. I am so hungry. I can eat an antelope. And then 10 is I am Thanksgiving stuffed. 3 is that first onset of hunger. 7 is satiated. You want to start to eat at 3, that first onset of hunger, that hollow, not like growling, revving up kind of feeling, but like a slight hunger pang is when you want to start to really eat, if that makes sense. Oh, and then what did I say about LMNT? Oh, LMNT Plus is a brand. I don't always recommend it just because it's high in salt and sometimes very high in sugar, depending on the ones. Because I like to recommend electrolytes to help with the adrenals, like the brand Ultima is a great one because it's actually a bad electrolyte and that's low in sodium and low in sugar. But the LMNT Plus, that is chocolate caramel flavored, you can get it on Amazon. It's a great little option to put with some like warm water, I like to take that Remedy protein shake or some Truvani chocolate protein powder and mix it in there with it. And I feel like I'm drinking hot chocolate. I swear it does. I feel like I'm cheating. But maybe I'll do like half a packet because there's 1,000 milligrams of salt in it. So if you worked out and you're sweating a lot and it's going to be summer, okay, it's not as big of a deal. But if we have blood pressure abnormalities, we might want to be really cautious about the dosing of that. Oh, and do you have access to supplements? Kim?
Yeah. You're gonna, yes, you do have, well, we do give access.
Okay.
Full scripts.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we can share that link. And we'll have like a different, we'll have a full script account for sure. That's a great question.
I
Um,
believe I'm starting with you next week, so that's why I just was curious.
Yes. I didn't want to
Great.
say it because I didn't know if you wanted.
Yep,
Oh,
I'm
but
with
yeah,
you, I'm with you
it's
next,
good.
and after hearing you tonight, I'm really, really excited, so great.
Yay, that's fun. Awesome. Thank you.
And then just, we had a question, thoughts on creatine.
Ooh,
I like it. There is some research for postmenopausal women showing a benefit in preventing a decline in muscle, bone strength,
and
and
cognition.
yeah, and reducing inflammation in the body.
We
So I'm
love
a fan of it. I would just say be careful with making, when you do have creatine, you do have to make sure you're getting enough water because it pulls water into your muscles. So you have to make sure you're having good hydration or it can dehydrate you. And also if you have a kidney problem, because it can dehydrate you, that could be not work as well for you too. But that would be something to discuss maybe with the doctor or with your dietitian as well.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have anything else to say about it.
No, I agree. What do I say? I don't think that there's no, people always ask about loading phase and optimal timing. Loading phase is no less null and void. Just take, I think it's 5 milligrams, right? 5 grams.
Yeah,
5
they
mil-
usually, it's usually 5 mil. I usually tell people just take it sometime around your workout, either
Mhm.
before or after 5 milligrams,
Mhm.
5 grams, not milligrams.
Right. I always get stuck. I'm like, oh, bulk supplements. What is it? That's
Yeah.
one of the best brands is bulk supplements. Creatine monohydrate.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have any other questions in the chat? Just wanna
Nope.
see. Oh no, sorry. But I'm reading the thank you messages, but thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys sitting through, and I'm sorry I went a little long, but I hope you guys got something from today. Excellent. Have a great night and get to bed early.
Bye.
Bye, guys.